Hello everyone and welcome back to JP's Turf. It's getting really busy in the shop, but I finally got a chance to get this last 260 up on the bench for reassembly. I'd like to share some tips and tricks with you along the way. So let's go. Okay, so here we are on the bench. I've got, this is the last unit that I went through. It's a different unit than the first video. I have 4 of them to go through total. But it's all been paralleled up and the reels ground to a true cylinder. I did go ahead and give it a quick spin just to make sure we didn't have any burrs on it or anything. The knife has been ground. I run 10 top and 14 front on these, cutting the zoysia, and have good luck with those angles. I'll go really more into bed knife grinding and the grinder in a separate video, but I just wanted to cover the things that I look for and the techniques that I use on reassembly on these. And a note about the paralleling. In the last video you saw me take that unit over to the surface plate and just loosen up the side frame bolts, and it settled right down and I was able to dial it in from there. On this unit and one other unit, that wasn't enough, and I had to go further and look at other issues. The drum bearing blocks in this unit and that one other were both settled down to the bottom, and they weren't settled up, I guess is the way to put it. Ideally, of course, you want to have everything with all the weight of the machine sitting down on the surface plate, and I found on this machine that just loosening up the bearing block bolts on the non-adjust side let the machine settle down quite a bit. Order of assembly with these at the factory: they mount the gearbox and the engine to the cross frames, then the side plates go on, then that goes down as an assembly onto the drive drum. And apparently it wasn't setting down all the way on the drive drum when they tightened up the bearing block bolts. So that's just another thing to look for. And you know, there's enough adjustability in the machine to take care of any misalignment. Once you get all the bolts sitting up on the same side of the holes, basically. So just wanted to cover that. You notice this thing's sitting back on its back and has been for a while. I always turn the fuel off before I tip these back, because you never know if you might get called away or something. You don't want to have opportunity for the fuel to be flooding the engine and contaminating the oil while you're working on the machine. So we always turn the fuel off, and like I said, everything's been ground straight. I grind the bed knife to the pivot bolts in the grinder, so I know that that's the front face is parallel to the pivot bolts as well as the top face. And before I start just going ahead and putting all the hardware in, I always rotate the knife up and just gently touch the reel off on it. And I'll use a piece of test paper to pinch between the reel and knife on each end. And you want to make sure that there's not a large gap on either end, because even though we've ground everything straight, with this design, the pivots for the bed knife are actually part of the bearing housing. And anytime that one of these has taken a big hit, in my experience, the bed knife will get pushed up and the reel blade will come around and strike the front of the bed knife, and that'll of course bend the reel blade. I've seen them hit hard enough that they actually bend the heads of the screws, and it tries to shove the whole bed bar back, and when it does that, the pivot point actually will rotate. The reel bearing blocks actually are a pretty tight fit in the side frames, but the bolt holes have a little bit of play, and after that hit, that bearing block will rotate, and that will rotate that pivot point up. And this is a quick check to make sure that you do have everything sitting parallel. Of course, if that does happen, if you have a groomer, you'll have to get the groomer drive out of the way, remove the groomer shaft and the groomer drive as an assembly to be able to access those retaining bolts for the bearing block. And then I keep the knife installed and actually use the knife as my guide. When I rotate that bearing block back down, I'm looking for even contact on the reel because I know it's a true cylinder. I know that my knife is straight to the pivot bolts. So once I get that brought down, I can then tighten that bearing block back up and then assemble it as normal. So this one is really dead straight, and we can go ahead and proceed with assembly. So note about the T-bolts. Whenever we're doing a grind on them, we do clean the threads and make sure that there's a little bit of lube on the threads. They come greased from the factory. We use an aerosol lubricant here, but use the lube of your choice to keep the corrosion out and to keep the threads nice and smooth on these. So I'll go ahead and install the first tension spring and T-bolt over here on the leading side and push it up and just get a couple of threads started on the adjuster so that then it can hang on that T-bolt. Come over to the trailing side, do the same thing with the tension spring, feed it in there and get the T-bolt up into the adjuster. A couple of threads started there. And then from there we can draw it up. Here's where putting the nuts on the tops of the adjusters really helps, because now I can use the electric ratchet to bring everything up. Note about power tools with cutting units. You saw me using an impact wrench on the side frame bolts before. I don't use an impact for assembly on anything with a reel, bed knife pivots or adjusters or anything like that. I'll use an impact to zip the cutting unit apart, but on assembly I like using a ratchet. This ratchet here has a torque limit of 25 foot-pounds. I know that I'm not going to over torque any of the fasteners. I've seen guys use the impacts to zip the pivot bolts in, and over time that the threads will pull and the surface will mushroom out over time. So it's just, I think it's good practice just to use controlled torque when you're putting that in. Now, as I bring this knife in, I'll bring the first adjuster up until I just start compressing the spring, come over to the other side and get it up on tension, and then just alternate back and forth so that I don't put a lot of bend in that bed bar on its way up. Helps if you go the right way, Patterson. There we go. That's close enough. Now I can grab my 17 and start dialing them in by hand. I always spin the reel over backwards when I'm bringing the reel in to keep from crashing that fresh ground edge. I bring it down till I just get a good scuff and then back it off till it's quiet. Same thing on the other end. Get a good scuff and back it off till it's quiet. Now I know I'm pretty close. Now I'll get my feeler gauge, and I always set up with a feeler gauge now. And I say now, I didn't always. I always took a lot of pride in that, hey, I got a good feel, I can dial it in and it cuts and it's great. Well, I found out by going back and checking myself after that, hey, I'm really off a few clicks here. So you can still cut paper and be off a couple of thousandths, especially with a fresh ground reel. So it's good to start with a known starting point with a feeler gauge, and I had to swallow my pride there to get that done. Now, I will rotate the reel forward here, and when I use my feeler gauge, I'm not sliding it left to right. I'm just inserting it straight in, parallel with the top face, so that it's going in along with the reel blade. And we'll bring it in until I just get a bump on that feeler gauge. And this is where having a long wrench on your adjuster really helps to be precise in bringing this in now. And one side will always affect the other. I did not have any contact over here, but as soon as I tightened the leading side up, then I had contact. And now I back off the trailing side, and now it's quiet again. We'll bring the leading side in just a little bit here. And there I've got a good bump on the leading side. I'll back off just a little bit. That's bumping pretty hard. Now I'll come down the trailing side and repeat that. Bring it in just a little bit again. And I'm just about there. Back off the leading side a little bit, in with the trailing side, and we should be pretty close. One of the reasons for going with the wrench versus the knobs, if you look, the pivot point and the T-bolt here are very close together with this design. So even if it's a fine thread, just a very slight movement with this T-bolt, by the time you get out to the front face from the pivot point, it makes a big difference. So that's why I really like using the wrench for doing this. There's my bump back. I am getting a whisper here. It's scuffing pretty good, and we've got a really good bump. I can actually back this off just a skosh. There we go, we're quiet. I've got just a little bump, and we'll call that good. Now I can lock down my adjusters before moving on, and they should not move just by locking them down. We want to confirm that. Still quiet. And now, if you so choose, you can cut a little paper. You know, from my experience though, you just wind up having to blow the paper out of the reel. If your edges are sharp and your gap is set correctly, and your angles are right, it's gonna cut clean as a whistle all the way across. So I really generally don't cut paper on the bench when I'm assembling after a fresh grind. Of course, we're always checking the cutting units as they come in off of the course, but on reassembly after a fresh grind, it's really just kind of an ego stroke. So that's our cut set. And next up, I'll be installing the shield. I do always pull the shield when grinding. It's just, I mean, it's 2 bolts, get it out of the way. That way you can see the reel surface. It's a lot easier using the reel diameter tape to wind it in there. You're not having to look over under the front of the shield. And one of the things you might notice here is that we have the storage pins for the speed shaft, the connecting shaft that goes in between the height, the cut gearboxes. This is the position for adjusting the height, but then for storage they provide these pins. You can move the speed length back and put it on these storage pins. Here in our shop, we don't carry those speed lengths on the mowers. It's just one more thing to go wrong, and I would just as soon keep them here in the shop, because we're only ever changing height of cut on these mowers here in the shop anyway. Like I say, I hate to think of one of those getting popped off and going through a reel or something like that. So we keep those out of the way, and we do use the side shields that are provided. It really does help get the grass in the basket. And then the shield, the clips on the shield that hook onto the back of the bed knife, I open those up a little bit, and I found that just using the edge of the table here, I can just flex them out a little bit and get a little bit more clearance. So then it's pretty easy to just feed the shield around. Once you get up to the edge, it'll be a little bit of a bump there to get past the edge, but this will be a little loud. So it's really easy to come in and out, and I just as soon get it out of the way. So then we put our side shields on here, get things lined up, and get our retaining bolts in. This is where I really get nervous. I don't get nervous dealing with the reel and the bed knife. I get nervous thinking about dropping this bolt down into the reel and then having to fish it out. So I make sure that I keep a finger on that and get that brought down. The side brackets here are all the way up because this is a brand new reel. I do like to maintain a tight gap between the reel and the shield. It really does help with grass ejection and getting the grass out of the reel into the basket. I'll just snug down the shield here. And that's that. So that's basically the cutting unit setup for cut. Then we'll follow up with setting height of cut, and then after that we'll set the groomer height. I've gone through and checked my chain tensions and made sure that I do have that 1/4 inch or so of free play at mid-span of the chains, and got my film of grease on the axle and in the seal in the side cover there. Other things we do for setup, we Of course, we check our fluid level, we check our oil level in the engine, and like I said before, we're looking at our cable routing and making sure everything's tied up, and that's about it, really. From here, like I said, I'll set height and get the side covers on. I won't bore you with that, and that'll be that. So, thanks a lot for joining me here today, and I hope that you got something out of it. And I got to get busy checking in some new equipment, so we'll see you on the next video.